What's up, guys? And we are looking at my session Save Me that's out now. I got a few requests from producers, curious about the session, and I'm going to briefly go through some of the designing, the drops, the breakdowns, maybe some processing on the vocals. I'm not going to go overextensive because the entire session breakdown and examples of production things that I've done in here is in my masterclass that's coming out next month. This track has been released here in February. My masterclass is coming out next month again, so that will be featured in there. But today we're going to take a look at the majority of the session. I want to kind of give some insight on what I did. Let's just play the start of the record so anyone just not familiar can get used to it.
Blue is what you do. You give me yellow highs and orange skies. Red, I'm seeing red. I'm riding violet waves away from yesterday. Need help, scream out. I'm losing touch, need you to save me. Need help, scream out. I'm losing touch, need you to save me. Need you to save me. Ooh, need you to save me. You give my life color, color, color. You give my life color, color, yeah.
Okay, so that's your intro, verse, pre-chorus to our chorus drop. The main thing I wanted to do on this type of record, sitting at 120 BPM, which is a little slower than I would usually work in, but the main thing I was focused on was developing a hook vocal that could be memorable. Just something simple, but just something people can connect to. It'll kind of carry out the record. I don't need to overdo it instrumentally wise. So that's kind of the thing I was fighting with when I was producing this was, do I want to do something instrumental wise really, really big, or do I want to develop a vocal hook? So I went for something more hooky with this vocal line here. So we'll start there.
Need you to save me. Ooh, need you to save me. You give my life color.
And one thing I want to show in today's kind of small, brief walkthrough, like some of the atmospheric things I touched on that your average listener probably wouldn't grasp. It's more of a feel thing that you kind of get when you're listening to the record as a whole. When I solo it here, you probably wouldn't notice this sound. It's the Save Me tail that I just hooked and just looped and EQ'd out, so it's really just very, very atmospheric. Without it, it still was fine. It was really focused on the Save Me hook, but when I started putting that idea together, it kind of grasped more of a vibe to the drop. It was really, really nice. So stuff like that I love doing. Again, starting with atmospheric stuff I did in the intro. I like using Arcade, that's from the company Output. I love doing sounds like this, underlaying kind of a vocal. So super, in a way, cinematic, but very, very mysterious, and it just gives this certain body underneath the vocal and the chords and the breakdown parts. Let's go over to the drop and talk more about that.
Need you to save me. Ooh, need you to save me.
So on top of when I was producing this, what I was looking for instrumental wise is like muted guitars or fret type stuff and very, very muted kind of sounding stuff. I really like that organic feel to bass lines, to guitars. So I played this in here, and I want to talk about the processing of the main guitar that I ended up looping. So this plugin I use quite a bit. Again, I'm going to talk about this a lot in my masterclass. The Focus One from Sick Individuals is, it's a really good plugin to drive stuff, overdrive it, kind of push distortion, width you can do, and there's even compression in there. It's just a good overall excitement plugin, and without it, let's hear the guitar without anything. And it has a little side chain. I can look at that in a sec. So it's got its reverb. Generally, a guitar like this, I wouldn't push reverb too much for being a main drop, but it really fit with the bass lines being super clean and super mono. I could kind of get away with a saturated reverb type guitar. So with that on, so simple lows, we don't need to talk about that. Cutting out the lows, it's not useful in that guitar on the drop. Going to the sampled guitar on the breakdown, it's just holding out the root key of that sample, so it's kind of building up in this section here. So you can hear that guitar. Without it, it was a bit basic. You know, still good, but I'm always looking for that 5% edge in a record where I'm like, okay, could it use a string? Could it use a guitar? Could it use effects? Whatever it is, I kind of experiment with what that missing hole is in the record. In this place, it was this guitar. And it all cuts really clean, a bar before the drop. You'll see in the third chorus drop, I extended by an extra bar just to alter the arrangement. Okay, let's look at the bass lines. There's 3 different bass. This one being more of that typical distorted house pushing bass. It's probably more of that mid-range. You guys can see I'm not using any highs in that because there's a fret guitar in here that I wanted to use that plucky feel. So another mid to high. You can see how much I'm cutting off there. Those 2 elements alone, bass, how I kind of came across those was, you know, trying them and experimenting with them, but one has to complement the other. Otherwise, as I've always said, just get rid of that kind of layer that doesn't work well with the other one. I always experiment with kind of pushing the boundaries of another layer on top of another one. So this is our really good main bass. And again, I used focus 1 on here. Listen to the slight difference in the distortion. Pretty big difference there. Simple LFO tool to tuck everything for the side chain. I copy pasted that to the other bass lines. But this Focus 1 plugin really went a long way in this record because it's more of an acoustic kind of sounding record as far as the simplicity of the instrument. So I wanted to add that saturation distortion slightly, and this plugin really did the job. Need you to save me. Need you to save me. All right, so let's look at something interesting I want to point out. When I kind of started bouncing this and messing with, is it ready? You know, is it done yet? I noticed on the 1 right here where your kick first hits, it felt a little muddy, and I think it's because I'm in that B key. I just felt like, okay, I want to add maybe just a kick come dry, maybe just a fill element. So what I did was get rid of all the percussion, get rid of all the effects right on the 1 for you to get that first impact hit from this kick, no bass lines, and then I just let the guitar ride with that. And then in drop 2, I did another variation of that idea. Drop 3, I actually didn't do a pause. So you kind of get that variation idea with different drops and impact. And when I didn't have this pause, again, it felt a touch muddy. I think it's because of the key I'm in. I did experiment with a few semitones, didn't get the right feeling, so I stuck with this. But the solution I found was doing that kind of muted right on the hit of the 1. Okay, let's take a look at the vocal. I did saturate the vocal a little bit on the drops. I like using dimension tools and something that can kind of widen it. and differentiate it from the verse or from maybe a build-up. So it is getting a bit more saturation here on the drop.
Need you to save me. Need you to save me.
And it does have the LFO tool. Does every producer do that? No. Some artists will think that's a big sin to duck and sidechain vocals on the drop, which I can understand. For me, I know a guy like Morgan Page does it. For me, I like if you can do it in a subtle way to create the vibe. So with this saturation, I just used warm tube, and then the dimension expander helped with the width. It really just helped create a drastic change from the verse to the drop chorus.
Need you to save me. Need you to save me.
And something that just, for some reason, this secondary hook, it really gets into a lot of people's minds is it being memorable. This line here I just put together. These are all phrases that I kind of just chopped up and put together from a sample. But this one right here it just turned into the memorable part of the record.
You give me this color.
And I don't know why. I think it's super catchy. I just don't understand why. I think it's just the melodic and how she sings it. But I did use the vocal finalizer. I use this a lot on vocals without it.
You give my life color. You give my life color, yeah.
So it's a little bit hidden, dull. It's just in the back of the mix. And again, this type of record, I wanted vocal on top. I wanted simple instrumentals, and not overthinking the process of getting the message to the listener. And that's this hook. So I didn't overdo the processing. I just made sure mixing this on top was the most important thing. Okay, let's look at our kick drum. I just boosted lows, this kick sample. I went from very 80s style bass of the kick, and then I went for the same thing on the snare. You know, these are very 80s, 90s sounding things, and I like to mix that up in my records. I don't always have to be, super clean, your average sample. I just don't like doing that. I like finding stuff that's maybe a little older and can bring it into a more modern sounding record, which is what I did here. And then simple effects, as I talked about, missing the one, but we got some effects down here. White noise downsweep, a just generic crash that I put together with that. And then more perks come in later down in the second 4 right here. Just some simple hi-hats and toms that, again, are influenced 80s style. But then I have a couple snare hits that really tie things together in the second part of the drop here. Those are really good to have, because your listener, even after the first 4 bars, I notice sometimes the attention span, they just want to move on. So you have to really keep people tied in, and it can be the simplest thing of percussion, adding a layer to chords, adding another guitar. But for me, it's mostly percussion that I like introducing, which is the snares there.
Need you to save me. Need you to save me. You give my life color.
All right, let's move over to the verse here.
Confused, I'm so used to not getting what I want. It's what you do. You give me yellow.
So being a radio record, kind of a streaming type record, you got to really push towards percussion carrying out. If you kind of just restart into verse 2 with it being basic and stripped, it doesn't technically or usually work too well. So you guys can see I carried out all my percussion, filtered them a bit so that they can come in a bit fuller here, added another atmospheric piece coming in at this measure right here. And that's all coming from Arcade, guys. I can't talk enough about these guys as a company. All the stuff they put out, I use as much as I can in a creative way. It's really incredible. So we got the vocal coming in. again hooking to our now second chorus, and I'll play out the bed of this verse. We got a guitar from Nexus. What I did with that is I used the chords of the piano that we used in verse 1, but I then put it in as a ARP. So without it, you know, super static, there's no movement, there's just not a lot of anything, you know, nothing interesting with that. But the ARP really helps the vibe, and strings underlying the ARP there. And then after those 4 bars, I start bringing another string and another bass layer to, again, progress the arrangement.
Not getting what I want. Ooh, it's what you do. Low highs.
Kind of a Reese style bass, a little bit tucked. Again, don't need highs because I have the guitars, I have the strings, I have the vocal. There's no need for high end in that bass. It's really just to get that low feel leading up to this chorus right here before the next drop.
Yesterday, need help, scream out, I'm losing touch, need you to save me. Need help, scream out, I'm losing touch, need you to save me. Need you to save me.
Okay, so on drop 2, I went right into it. As you guys remember, I took the 1 off on drop 1. This one I went right in with more percussion starting out. You guys can see I didn't have that there. Just a bit more variation. Didn't add much on the effects side because I was starting to add more percussion. I started to bring the bass back in. So wanted them to differentiate in that way, and it really worked well. And then drop 2, I double up. So it's a 16-bar chorus, as you guys can see here, versus just that 8 on the 1. So that kept my listeners more intrigued and tied in. You can see I bring in chords here on drop 2 just to fill it out.
You give my life color, yeah. Need you to save me.
So that's a tension string that's holding out just in the root key. I have pianos coming in from Nexus. I have a string coming in with no lows, no mids, just very high driven. And then I have a nice guitar to top it off. Again, using as much Focus One as I can. I love that plugin. All of these are going through the same LFO chain to Duck. And then we get to our kind of break where I experiment with the vocal being more of a phone filter type thing. So I saturated that vocal as much as I could. I used this one here, the Supermassive, unbelievable plugin. I believe they put this out for free. I'm not sure if they're charging for it now, but I did grab it. It's probably still free, but it's incredible, this one. I use all Valhalla's stuff as much as I can, but I really saturated it just to drown it out because it's just sending an 8-bar message to the record of, okay, this is our finalized piece, this is our bridge, this is our last build. It didn't need to be anything kind of too clean and in the face. And I found another atmospheric piece from Arcade. It's slightly different from the first one. So you're getting that variation. Will your average listener notice that? Probably not. It's something that I feel when I'm listening back to it. It's definitely there for a purpose. So my point to that is if you find stuff like that in your record, you know, simple things that you hear that create the vibe, that's huge. You know, it's not always about putting instruments in that everybody can hear every single thing. That's not really possible. You can't hear every single thing in a record. You got to understand there's feel and then there's hearing something, and those both have to tie together. Yeah. Okay, so our final build, I extend the build up one extra bar, and I did use Endless Smile to just build out the tension and wash everything out.
Need help, scream out, I'm losing touch, need you to save me. Need help, scream out, I'm losing touch, need you to save me. Need you to save me.
Okay, so that's our final drop. I added a guitar hook that mimics the notes of the actual drop hook here. Let me just solo that out. So I copied the notes into a guitar. And that's not anywhere else in the record. It just adds that light extra flavor to the end of the record. Something minimal can go a really long way with that. I, again, love using guitars, so knew that was a spot to do it. And it really is nice to have this extra bar to build to kind of create that tension to the final drop. And again, everything ties in. All the percussion's playing. There's no pause on the one like I did on the first drop. There's no, simple fills that are going in. It's really just rushing all together here to the final drop.
Need you to save me. Need you to save me. You give me this color, color, color. You give me this color, color, yeah. Need you to save me. Need you.
Yeah, so as you guys can tell, the main message here is that vocal is on top. The way I mixed it is super, super important. I did do numerous mastering chains for this one, tried variations of oversaturated, overcompressed, no compression, pushing the limiter. I tried certain things here over and over, but I'm not going to share that today. It's going to be in my masterclass that's released coming up. So make sure you guys check that out if you want to see more on this record. I'll talk about the mastering, the mixing, more inside the plugins, the presets, and the sound design. We're going to go more in depth with that. But that is it for today with the brief walkthrough. That's my record, Save Me. It's out now on all platforms, guys. I hope you enjoy, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you soon.